How are the kings looking at religion? How are the subjects looking at... Although I don't want to call them subjects now that you have illuminated on the point that they were really thinking for themselves also.
Yeah.
It wasn't such a top-down thing. But tell me, religion, how did they look at it?
Well...
And were they kind of tolerant? Because they were also giving, donations to Vaishnavas, to Jains, to Buddhists. Did they have a more kind of pluralistic...
So it kind of depends. In the Deccan, you have a lot of claims by the enemies of the Cholas, the Chalukyas. They destroyed a whole bunch of Jain temples.
Okay.
And if you look at a lot of the wealth that is being gifted by the Cholas to their temples, they do specify that mostly it's royal treasuries that they're getting it from, but they're also like gifting jewelry, ornaments that seem to be of, temple provenance. And there's also some limited evidence of them seizing the idols of defeated enemies and bringing them back to their territories. And this recently has become a little bit of the right wing has found a very creative way to magic away the inconvenience of this, because the idea that Hindu kings attacked temples is obviously... It challenges a lot of assumptions about how devout they were. So what is very often claimed by right-wing influencers is that when these kings took back idols, the idols were still worshipped.
Yeah, they were given a respectful place. They weren't desecrated.
Right.
Yeah.
But what is a respectful place? Very often kings would capture the imperial idols that represented the power of the rival dynasty and then put it in a much less respectable place in their own city. So they put it on a gateway, for example. Now, it's not desecration, but I think we're straining the definition of respectable at the very least.
It's still trying to show them their place.
Yeah, exactly.
Through the god.
Exactly. And the bigger question that is not being addressed is wars were extremely chaotic. You look at descriptions in Chola court texts. I'm not even talking about the enemies of the Cholas. You look at, for example, the Kalingattaparani, which is a 12th century court text, and it talks about how as the army is advancing, orchards are being burned, rivers are drying up because so many mouths are drinking from them, and villagers are fleeing to their king to beg him to protect them from the Cholas. Now, the Cholas are saying this because, of course, they want to present this image, but it tells you very clearly what medieval wars were like. In fact, even today, when you have fairly well-disciplined armies with regular training structures and disciplinary procedures, you still find soldiers very often breaking the conventions of war.
Course, yeah.
So what do you think that medieval polities were doing? Do you think medieval polities were politely going and having a wrestling match between the two muscular dude bros who ruled the kingdom and then calling it a day after that? These were terrifying wars. Very often what is happening to a temple is incidental to the broader program of expansion and savagery and mayhem that is being unleashed. And this was the case no matter what the religion of the ruling dynasty was and what they were doing to their rivals' singular stone structures. I think there's a really great shortcoming in the way that we think about wars, and it enables this ceaseless glorification of medieval conquest almost as a totemic representation of us now being aggressive and warlike. But I don't think that the average medieval person was as rosy-eyed about war as the average 21st century Indian. Now, leaving that aside, coming back to the question of temples, you do see some cases where in the Rajarajeshwaram temple, the Brihadishwara temple at Tanjore, there are some mentions of lands being appropriated from Jain and Vaishnava temples to be given to this one.
Okay.
But at the same time, you have Rajaraja Chola's sister, Kundavai, building Jain temples in a frontier of the kingdom. So I think that there was no singular, consistent religious policy. A lot of what was being done was mostly on an ad hoc basis, responding to local political needs.